Okay, so now we're looking at the still flying short stories. These stories are a little less well known than the comics and novels. So, to provide some background, these short stories were originally written for the Firefly Still Flying companion book, and since that book got collected into Firefly A Celebration, they're found in there too. By the way, Firefly A Celebration is an amazing book, highly recommended for hardcore Firefly fans. I should say this video will contain spoilers for these four short stories. Although they're very short stories, I generally think fans consider these stories to be canon. They're written by some of the original writers of the TV show, and they were published in official Firefly merchandise. As I'm obsessed with timelines, we'll be discussing where these stories probably fall. Because the timeline is now getting a little hard to read, I hope you'll forgive me if I zoom in for this one. So first up is What Holds Us Down, written by Jane Espenson, who was the writer of the episode Shindig. So this story mostly features only Kaylee and Wash, and they're in a dire situation. Wash is badly injured, and Kaylee is attempting to keep him alive and conscious, while also trying to repair the broken spaceship that they found themselves stranded in. And they need to remain quiet enough that they're not discovered by the bad guys. Honestly, I think this is probably my favourite of the four. It's also the only story in the entirety of the Firefly canon in which I think Kaylee is really the main focus, which is kind of sad. We need more Kaylee episodes, in my opinion. Timeline-wise, this is the tricky one. There's really no firm clues here at all. I like to think of this as happening, obviously, before the movie, but fairly late on in the timeline. My justification for this is entirely thematic. This is a pretty dark story, and thematically I feel like dark and desperate stories belong at the end of the timeline, close to the movie, which is also a dark and desperate story. The second story is a bit different from the other three. It's called Fun with Dick and Jane, and it's presented as a sort of twisted kids book. It was written by Ben Edlund, who wrote Janestown and co-wrote Trash. And to be clear, these 2 pages that you're seeing now, that's it. It's only these 2 pages. It's not a full kids book or anything like that. Is this story part of the canon? Does it fit in the timeline? I guess, sure, if you want. It shows Jane as a child, so it's clearly back up here someplace. If anything, I'd consider this to be a flashback, so don't expect to see this entry remain in the timeline after this video. Number 3, Crystal. So this was written by Brett Matthews, who wrote Heart of Gold and also co-wrote the comics Those Left Behind and Better Days. This story sees Simon administer River with a new drug to combat her whatever is wrong with her, and we follow River walking through the ship and interacting with the rest of the crew. I believe that it's called Crystal because temporarily River is capable of seeing glimpses or impressions of the crew's future, including the deaths of Wash and Book. She is temporarily seeing with absolute crystal clarity. My placement for this story is between The Message and Heart of Gold. Even more specifically, between Big Damn Hero and Better Days. And I could absolutely be wrong, but here's my reasoning. I don't think Simon would start with really experimental treatments like this before he had accessed the information about River in Ariel. And we know he's still examining that info in War Stories, which is set not long after Ariel. In this story, River picks up hints of Inara's inner turmoil, and it's not exactly clear what Inara is thinking and feeling, but whatever it is, I think it's supposed to be pointing towards her impending decision to leave Serenity. So I'm therefore confident that we're between War Stories and Heart of Gold. We also see through the interaction with Zoe that the ship is currently going through a bit of a lean period with supplies running low. This to me suggests that we're in the famine period caused by Niska after War Stories and ended by Better Days. And with the limited number of spaces left between War Stories and Better Days, I guess I just felt like after Big Damn Hero just sort of felt the best. I am also perhaps willing to entertain the idea that this drug leads to River becoming permanently less crazy, and is therefore a canon explanation for her seeming inappropriately lucid in Generations and Life Signs. So maybe this story is set after Objects in Space. It's not my preference, but I can see that argument. Finally, we have Take the Sky, written by Jose Molina, who wrote Ariel and co-wrote Trash. This story is a bit of a weird one. It's largely set in the future, with a retired Mal looking back on his life and giving us ideas about what happened to the crew since the end of their adventures. For instance, Simon and Kaylee are together, but Mal never really made it work with Inara. So we could say this entry belongs here at the end of the timeline, right? But actually the last section of this story throws us for a loop as the narration sort of zooms out and we see Mal about to face off against the operative at the end of the movie. I think the implication is supposed to be that all of this story is just a fantasy sequence that runs through Mal's head just before heading into a fight that, for all he knows, will be his last. It's a consideration of what he's putting on the line for his cause. He's risking his future by standing against the Alliance and taking on the operative. Therefore, maybe we have to put this story hereabouts and treat it like the shepherd's tale, because the framing narrative is concurrent with the movie. That's probably the best I can do for it. So, that is now the entire Firefly timeline. Anticipating the question, why haven't you included the current Boom comics? Well, the answer to that is that I don't really think they share a continuity with the Dark Horse and Titan books. I know some people will disagree, but when you get into the details, it becomes really difficult to reconcile the Boom material with everything else, and it makes for a much worse overall story as a result. Both continuities are stronger and more enjoyable, in my opinion, if you consider them as being separate canons. I'm still thinking how I'd like to do it, but the next part of this series will look at putting some actual numbers to the timeline, and I will be trying to answer the question, how much time is there between the beginning of the series and the movie?